What's happening, everybody? This is Nick here from Catskill Mountain Customs in upstate New York. And you know, it's been a minute since I did a video for YouTube. It's been on the top of my list, but just haven't gotten around to it. You know, it's a time thing. It's been busy around here. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But today, you know, I got off work on my main job this morning, and I'm a little tired, and I just been finding it hard to really zero in and focus today. So figured today would be a good day for a YouTube video. And I usually find on days like today, if I'm finding it hard to sort of dial in and focus, I do more harm than good if I try to force myself to work on something. So sometimes like this kind of just helps me get my mind in the groove and thinking right, and you know, we'll see how it goes. So I've been meaning to make this video for a while and kind of try out this format. Previous times I've made videos, I've really spent a ton of time editing them, trying to make everything look smooth, and it just takes a ton of time, and then I end up not making videos just because I don't have, I might find the time to film, but I don't have the time to sit there and edit it, and I'm not a film editor. I'm not quick or efficient at this stuff. So we're going to try doing it a little bit more loose, and I'm going to talk a little bit, about some things I like to call the principles of metal shaping, the ideas I find most important and fundamental if you're going to go ahead and get into shaping metal and try to have some success at it, whether it's at your project or a lot of projects in the future. So I pulled this old motorcycle fender off the wall. It's a steel fender that I made a while ago, a little buck that sat on. And I'm going to use it because I find this shape is a really good shape to demonstrate some really important ideas in metal shaping. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to be patterning this with just some paper. This is white auto body masking paper. I actually got the idea to use this from Mike Wagner at Cornfield Customs. He was 100% right recommending this. This stuff, it's a little bit more durable. I went to my local auto body supply and I told them I wanted white auto body masking paper, and I bought this huge roll. I think it's like 300 feet, and it was like $80 for 300 feet, something like that. And you can't beat it. It's durable. It's easy to write on. Yeah, so it works out really well. So what I wanted to talk about today, like I said, I call it the principles of metal shaping because it's kind of these ideas that once I got them, through my head, once I understood them, really opened up my abilities shaping metal. You can learn skills, techniques for, doing anything, but it doesn't mean that you know how to do the whole craft. For example, maybe you like to fish, right? I could teach somebody how to go out and cast your fishing pole, how to tie a knot, put a lure on, and get out there in the boat and cast out, and all the physical techniques of fishing. But that doesn't mean you're going to catch a fish, right? It'd be cool if it works that way, but that's how it goes. Same thing, I could teach someone how to hammer a nail or put in a screw. It doesn't make them a carpenter. You have to understand the principles of what you're doing. And so that's kind of what this is. So going back to the beginning, there's only a few things that we can do to metal when we're shaping it, right? If we're trying to turn sheet metal into a complex shape, there's only three main things that we can do. And people like to argue this, but it's the truth. You can shrink it, you can stretch it, or you can bend it. And really that's it. You can get into saying that you can cut and weld it, which is true. You can, but you're not going to make a shape like this fender with just cutting and welding, right? You're going to have to do more work than that. And you can argue that once you understand what shrinking and stretching is, that cutting and welding is basically the same as shrinking. So those are the three things that you can do to sheet metal to form a shape. I've posted about this on Instagram before, and I get these people telling me, well, you can melt it down and pour it into a mold, and it's like okay, yeah, I guess. But that's not how we make panels for cars and motorcycles and airplanes, right? That's not what we do. And if you really think about it, that's basically shrinking and stretching too. So we could shrink, stretch, and we can bend it. And to get some terminology out of the way in this, this industry or trade, those kind of fall into two categories. We have shape and we have form. Also, form is also known as arrangement. Ray Chalene, I think, kind of started coining that term, and it makes sense too, but I like to use form. But form arrangement is basically another word for bending. And an easy way that I learned to remember that when I was starting out, to remember the difference, is I consider this form is generally anything that you can undo relatively easily, right? Like bending. Let me grab a piece of scrap. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here's a little scrap piece of aluminum. Form. I bend this, right? And I can bend it back. Okay? For the most part. You can argue that with a severe bend, you can't get it perfectly straight because there's a little bit of stretch, but that gets into shape. So form is generally something that you can easily take out. Now, shape on the other hand, shrinking, stretching. That dent, you're not going to easily take that out, right? I've stretched the metal, especially if I give it a good hit. You can't push that out. We've stretched this metal, we've changed the surface area. That can't just go away without shrinking it back down. Okay? Shrink and stretch is something that you can't just take out of the panel easily. Form, think of it as something that you can just take out of the panel. You bend it back the other way. So when we're talking about form and shape, those are the main principles that we're talking about. And while they are different, they work together to make the shape that we're going for. You have to have the correct form and the correct shape into the panel to get the achieved result. And they influence each other. And when we look at this fender a little further, we'll get a good look at that. So let me trace the outline here on this quick pattern I'm making of this basic fender. Nothing too fancy or complicated here. And you know, I'm doing this for demonstration purposes, so we're not going to get everything super perfect. But we'll do it perfect enough that I hope you guys get the idea, get the point. What I like to do to trace the edge of panels is I get a carpenter's pencil and I shave it, so I expose some lead on the edge here, and then you can just go and scribe around the edge of the panel. I can't see. There we go. There's a bead I put in this fender. That's making it a real pain in the butt, but we'll get there. So already, if you've watched some metal shaping videos before, you can kind of see what's going on here with this pattern, right? So I've got these tucks or folds, wrinkles, whatever you want to call them, going down these sides. Got laid straight in the front. So if you see it before, you probably know that those tucks represent the area that needs to be shrunk. And the spots that are tight. Okay, everyone, I apologize for a little jump in the video here. The battery in the camera died. You know, rookie mistake, my fault, but didn't miss much, and we'll pick up where we left off. So what I was talking about is, what do the folds on this represent, right? This represents the change in surface area of the part, and the paper is trying to do that as well. Because when I create this fold and fold it over, That's what I'm doing, right? I'm decreasing the surface area of the paper as I go down. And, you know, when we open this up, those folds are the shape of triangles, because the more this curves over, the more I have to decrease the surface area down here. Okay? Now up here, the paper is just sitting pretty much nice and tight on its own, because up here, this is where the paper can lay, also where the metal can lay, without a real big change in surface area. You know, there's a little bit of a radius up here, but not much. So the paper wants to sit pretty well on its own up here. So what I was saying is, what's important is the change in surface area, right? So a couple different ways that we can go about doing this. I can't remember if this got cut off, so I might be repeating myself, but it's important. So we'll go with it, right? I can either go with shrinking all of this, and the shrinks would have to be progressive, right? Because as we can tell by these tucks that are triangle shaped and tall, you know, the tuck is taller down here than up here. That's showing me I'd have to shrink more down here than I would up here to create this radius. If this was just, you know, a flange, a bent 90-degree straight edge, the shrink would be consistent from the bend straight down. But it's not, it's a radius, so we have to shrink more down at the bottom than we do at the top. So I can go about it that way, and now that I have a big, nice Bailey power hammer, that's the way I'd go after it, because that's more efficient for me now. And there's some other reasons too, we can talk about that later, but we're just talking about for the purpose of making shapes. You know, that's an efficient way for me to go about it now, shrink these sides and maybe do a little stretch up top just to get that little radius. But if I didn't have that power hammer, or maybe I just don't like power hammers like some people do, you know, there's some of the greatest metal shapers out there, some of the best in the world don't use power hammers. We could start by just stretching up here, you know, and we'd stretch up here, and then we progressively stretch less out towards the sides. And what are we doing? The same thing. We're creating the same difference in surface area from here to here. Okay, so think about that. We could do it two different ways, right? Shrink it on the sides and basically leave the top alone, or start stretching the top, and as we get to the bottom, basically leave the bottom alone, and we're creating that difference in surface area. More commonly, and pretty much the optimum way, is you're going to do a little bit of both if you can, right? Because when we stretch, like we talked about, we make metal thinner. When we shrink, we make it thicker. Generally, for parts you're going to be making, having the metal a little bit thicker isn't going to be a bad thing, right? Because that's going to be a little bit stronger, a little bit heavy duty. So when you go at a part with all stretch, the part like right up here where we do the most stretching is going to be the thinnest. And if you start with thin material and you stretch it like crazy, you're going to end up with some pretty thin material up there, which isn't, I mean, necessarily a problem. You know, some of the most iconic sports cars in the world, the Italians, did everything, you know, almost all stretch. It's okay, but you can lean on those cars and dent them. So that's one of the reasons why shrinking might be a little bit better. But let's talk about, oh, before I talk about this pattern, something I got cut off is I just made some notes on here. You know, thankfully this isn't a video about how I make paper patterns, because this is terrible, but it's just for demonstration purposes. And all I did is I noted right across the top with the dotted line where the shrinks end. Okay, that's something that I'd note on my patterns, because when I'm shrinking, I need to know where to stop. Okay, so you can see when I pull the paper tight, that's right about where the shrinks end. And this is a pretty uniform part, so it's going to be about the same on both sides. Also, I noted, you know, I could tell by the folds when I take it off, but I notated, abbreviated heavy shrink in the center with arrows, tapering it out to a light shrink, because the center of this piece needs a little bit more shrink than it does on the sides, because this piece curves. And the same on the other side. This, like I said, it's a symmetrical part. So sometimes you can even take your pattern off, fold it in half, and make sure you got all those things symmetrical to help your part come out symmetrical in the end. I could do another video another time on how I make, you know, good patterns, but this will get us through for the sake of the video. So thinking about shrinking and stretching and which way to go about this, what are some factors that would help you, or what are factors that I would use in making this decision? Well, first off is your resources you have available. Okay, what kind of tools you have. If all you have is, a mallet and a sandbag and a stump, you're going to go about it pretty much all stretch, right? You'll get some shrinking in there, maybe some tuck shrinking along the edges. If you have, a tuck tool to make tucks in it, so you can make some tucks in that and do tuck shrinking more efficiently. You're going to shrink as much as you reasonably can by hand and then stretch the rest. That's a real good way to go about it. That's the way I did things for about a decade. If you have a nice big power hammer, and I have a nice big power hammer, great entry hammers, or, Sosa Metal Works makes one. I had one of those for years. That helps with the shrinking on this, and then you can go primarily shrinking. So your decision is going to be based on your resources, and like we talked about, what's going to create the best part. It might be a part that's not structurally significant, and you want to go all stretch. You can wheel it out. You can do the whole thing on the English wheel. This was done on English wheel, and you're going to come out with a beautiful surface finish, and that's okay, especially for steel parts and things like that. Aluminum's a little bit easier to stretch. So if, you can start maybe a little bit thicker aluminum. If you're going to stretch the whole thing, maybe go up to 80 thousandths instead of 63 thousandths and go that way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this pattern we made. I'm going to cut out some aluminum. This one's steel, but aluminum moves faster for the sake of demonstration. And we're going to basically roughly make this fender. And we're going to take both approaches. I'm going to do one on the power hammer, doing mostly shrinking. And we're going to do one over on the stump with a blocking hammer. And we're going to pound it out and see how they turn out. And we can take a look at how these principles work together to demonstrate that we can take either approach. As long as you make that change in surface area, we're going to get the part we're looking for. So that's it. Let me get to cutting these out, and I'll be back with you guys in a few minutes. Okay, got these pieces cut out. Cut these out of 3003 aluminum, and these are 63 thousandths thick, 063 material. This is the most common material you're going to find as far as aluminum and metal shaping in America. In Europe, it's a little bit different. I don't think they have 3003 in European countries, or maybe they have it designated differently. You also find guys using 1100, which here in America is considered pure aluminum. The 3003 has manganese in it, so it's a little bit more sturdy. It's not as soft as 1100. It takes a little bit more effort to shape, but it's resistant to cracking, so it works really well. What I did is I just laid the pattern on here, traced it, used 1/2-inch masking tape around the perimeter just to give a 1/2 inch extra. Question that comes up a lot is, how did I transfer my markings? My favorite way to do it is I lay the pattern on and I get a sharp scribe and I just scribe scratches right through the pattern onto my aluminum. That's my favorite method. You can use a center punch, like a spring-loaded center punch, or just a really lightly adjusted center punch. I sometimes use that in steel, but in aluminum I kind of stay away from it because I do a lot of polished parts. And I've had instances where even though I thought I was being nice and light with that center punch, when I was done with my part, I could still see little pinpricks, it looked like, in the material from where the punch went in. So just be careful with that if you're going to use it. But a lot of people use that method and don't have a problem. I just like using the scratches, and I find that they actually stay there pretty well throughout the shaping process. You'd be surprised how well just some little scratches will stay there, so you can follow them as a guide. Touch up your Sharpie if you have to. Okay, these are ready to go. I think first I will jump on the power hammer, because after I smash one out by hand, I'll probably get lazy and not want to do it anymore. So we'll start with the power hammer, doing our shrinking like we showed on our pattern. You can see these are V-shaped tucks, right? Which means I need more shrinking at the bottom than I do at the top. So I'm going to do progressive passes. I'm going to do I'm going to go all the way to the line, and I'm going to stagger, and I'm going to do my next round of shrinking, and I'm not going to go as high. I'm going to stagger it down and progressively shrink it. So I don't know if I'll film the whole process. This video can get pretty long. We might do something fast forward, but I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like, and we'll rough out this fender using the power hammer. And then once that's done, we'll get on to doing it with stretching, putting in some muscle into it. Let's get to it. Okay, so we've done a couple rounds of shrinking here, and you can see it's starting to look like something. It's real rough, but this is only shrinking, right? So what I've done is I've decreased the surface area down here in relation to up here in the center. I haven't touched the center. So the center is still the same surface area as when we started. Now just the sides are much less. So these sides need to come in more, and this needs to curve around more. So what can I do? Well, what do I have to do, right? I have to make a more dramatic change, a greater difference in surface area from here to here. So how can I go about doing that, right? I can go back to the power hammer and I could just keep shrinking. You know, further down here, I could just do a couple more rounds of shrinking. That's not a bad way of going about it. Or I could pick up a mallet in the sandbag and I can stretch up here, right? Because by stretching this, that's also creating a greater difference in surface area from here to here. All right, so before we get to that, before we get to tuning that in some more, we'll see how much time we've got. And before we get to smoothing it out, let's go over to the stump with the blocking hammer and start pounding on this other one and see how it comes out. Okay, so I'm going to start blocking this out. And like I said, now I'm going to do the opposite. When I was shrinking, I was focusing down here the most and tapering up to here. Now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to focus here in the center and then taper that out. Okay, so let's take a look at some progress here. This is, you know, just pounding into the bag, into the stump. And you can see we've got some reverse curve, some compound shape going here, not reverse. It's curving this way and it's curving this way, stretch only. Focusing most of my stretch right here in the center, tapering it out, creating the most, trying to create the biggest contrast in surface area between here and here. So for the sake of getting this video done today, what I think I'm going to do is throw some, I want to keep going with this theme of shrink only, stretch only. So I'm going to throw some radius stretch dies in the power hammer, and we'll continue stretching this Just obviously, machine power is going to go a lot faster than me keep pounding the stump, and it's going to make my arm feel better in the morning too. And then I'm also going to keep going with the shrink dies and shrink this down some more and try to get them a little bit closer using just the shrink and just the stretch methods. And, you know, see how it's looking. Okay, so here I got a flat top die, and this bottom die has about a 3-inch radius. So we're going to use this to do some stretching. Basically, these dies are just going to mash together and pinch the metal, pinch the aluminum between them, and just continue stretching just like we did over there on the stump. But as you'll see, much faster than me. Okay, so the power hammer sped up that stretching a little bit. You can see we got some nice compound shape going here. Good radius in both directions. You know, it's got a ways to go, but it's getting there. You can see it's working just the same. So to get this to fit the buck tighter, I just continue stretching up in this area as it's at further down. We need the most stretch here because remember what our pattern showed was the most shrink in this section. So for stretching only, we got to do the opposite. We got to create the biggest difference in surface area in here. So we continue stretching up here as it's sat down on the buck, keep stretching here and tapering it out. And eventually this will just sit right down on the buck. Obviously taking the shrink only method on a power hammer moves a little faster. We're getting closer already. What this does need is a little bit of stretch right on the top. Not so much to get it to fit, already is sucking pretty tight to the buck, but just to mellow out this radius a little bit. So I mentioned in the beginning, right, I was talking about shape, I was also talking about form, and I said that form and shape work together to create the final part. And I haven't talked much more about form ever since, but we're going to get there real soon. And then this will all sort of come together and we can wrap up this video. But these need to kind of look like something before we finish out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump on the planching hammer with both of these. The planching hammer is used to smooth things out. I would use the English wheel for the stretch only, but I've got the rubber band on the top wheel and I don't really feel like taking it off. But the planching hammer is technically a stretching tool. It tries to do minimal stretching, but anytime you smooth metal, you're going to stretch it just a bit. So I'm going to jump on the planching hammer, we'll clean these up, and then we're going to take a look and I'll show you a really good example of how form and shape have to work together to get your part correct. So let's get to it. So Here are our two fenders, straight off the planching hammer. A little bit of acetone, wipe some of the grease and oil off them. And there they are, all stretch, all shrink. Now, these aren't perfect yet, you know, obviously they need some work, but I don't think it takes too much imagination to see that either method, you keep going and you're gonna have a nice looking fender that fits what we need it to fit. You know, so we could put more time into them, we could get them looking, fitting perfect, but that's not the point of the video, right? The point of this video was for me to talk about form and shape and the fundamental of metal shaping to understand. And so we covered the shape part. I think I probably beat that horse a little bit too much, but you know, we're creating changes in surface area to create the shapes that we want in our paper patterns. Give us an idea of how we need to change that surface area to get the desired shape. Now I was talking about form before, right? I said form was basically bending. Anything you could do to the panel and easily undo. But it has a direct correlation with shape, and let me demonstrate that. If I come over and grab my radius gauges here, take a look at what I've got going. So this fender right now along the top is about, I think it's about a 3, yeah, right about a 3 on the top, and then it goes to about a 3.5 on the corners, and then it tapers out a little bit more to like a 5 on the sides. Whatever, it's not really important, but we need to remember, for the sake of this, that's about a 3 this way on the top and about 3.5 on the corners, right? And this way, we're looking at right about a 12 on the dot. Perfect. So, that's the shape of our fender. Now, let's manipulate form a little bit. If I take this and push it this way and manipulate the form, now I'm just bending it, right? Okay, so now I bent it. This was a 12 before. Now we're looking at a 9, right? Because I bent it this way, that makes sense. But what are we over here? Well, it was a 3. Let's put the 3 on it now. See the light coming through? Can you guys see that? It's no longer a 3 because we manipulated the form. Now it's about a 3.5 on the top when previously was a 3. And now these corners are no longer 3.5 like they were before. They're 4s. Okay? We could do it probably, we could definitely do it a little bit more. Just make more of a point. Now we've got this thing to probably about an 8 going this way, or 7 someplace in there. And now across the top, we're a 4. And on the corners, we're a 5. Let me flip that around so you can see. Corners, we're about a 5. All right. So this no longer fits our buck or even looks like what we need. But that's okay, because it's just form. So I could take it and bend it back. All right. Looks pretty good. And now we are right back to our 3 on the top and our 3.5s on the corners. And it sits on the buck. All right, so what I just demonstrated there is one of the most important things in metal shaping that beginners miss, because we all get to work and we're shaping, we're using our tools, we're getting after it. We have our radius gauges, right? And we're putting shape in the panel. Maybe we're beating into it. Maybe we're using the power hammer, and we take our radius gauge and we check it. And man, it's not where we need it. We need a little bit more. So then we put more into it. But what we forget is to make sure the form is correct, because if you have this in this form and you're hammering on it to make it a 3, which you can stretch this right now to make it a 3 radius instead of the 4 that it probably is. But then when we bring it to our buck and put it back into the correct form, or arrangement, some people say, what would happen? It would be overstretched or overdeveloped in that center. So, to wrap up this video, that might be a little bit long-winded for all of you, but we need to make sure that the difference in surface area is correct to create the necessary shape. And in order to see, to visualize and check that shape that we're looking for, the panel also needs to be in the correct form. All right, so that's it, guys. That's the magic. You get those things figured out, get your head wrapped around it. You can approach any job. You know, this is a nice, simple piece to demonstrate something like that. But, you know, it works for more complex shapes. Like this piece I'm working on here. This is a 1947 Indian Chief saddlebag. Bunch of really complicated shapes, right? But all that is manipulating the surface area of the metal to achieve the desired shape. All right, so thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, leave me a message. If you enjoyed this, leave me a message in the comments. Leave a comment. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Let me know if you want me to explain anything any further. Let me know what you're working on. And, you know, if enough people enjoyed this video, I'll keep them coming. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.